Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Ben Olson, that's Nathan Fox. We're the founders of LSATdemon.com and our weekly podcast, Thinking LSAT. We have an email here from someone who is calling themselves Common Questions, and the subject is, can you reverse conditional statements on the LSAT?
Can you reverse conditional statements on the LSAT? Wow, that's a very abstract question, right?
Yeah.
Conditional statements. What do you mean by that? And then what do you mean by can they be reversed? So what do we think we're talking about here, Ben, when people say, how do I properly reverse or negate conditional statements? How do I clarify? What's the difference, Ben, between the contrapositive, a mistaken reversal, and mistaken negation?
Man, this is why we avoid all of this.
I can give a real simple example, though.
Sure, go for it.
Well, I mean, a conditional statement is just any statement that has an if-then.
Yep.
So, if you're in if you're in Manhattan, then you're in New York City.
Yep.
Okay.
That's an if-then statement. If you're in Manhattan, then you're in New York City.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the contrapositive is just a highfalutin way of saying that same thing in different words. So if the conditional statement as defined here is if you're in Manhattan, then you're in New York City, we could say that the statement, if you're not in New York City, you can't be in Manhattan, is the contrapositive of that statement.
Yep. And you've done two things there to get technical and to get into this mindset, right? You've switched the if then and you've negated both clauses.
Yeah. And I used to be in the old days, I'd be like, hold on a second, let me get my whiteboard out
and
I'd
show
start
you
writing a bunch of like formal hieroglyphics. But I've learned over the years that in a lot of ways, there is no such thing as the contrapositive. I know that blows people's minds. But
okay, because there literally is thing. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, there literally is, but then again, it's just the same statement, So the rule, if you're in if you're in Manhattan, then you have to be in New York City. That rule implies its own contrapositive. If you're not in New York City, you can't be in Manhattan. Why? Well, because if you're in Manhattan, then you're in New York City.
Yeah.
So when I say there's no such thing as the contrapositive, what I mean is every conditional statement implies its own contrapositive, and the contrapositive and the conditional statement aren't different from one another.
Yeah.
They're a different articulation of the same rule.
Maybe another way of saying it is that they're a restatement, but they mean the same thing.
And no, they mean the exact same thing. And there's like many different ways that you can do this conditional, right? You could say only those in New York State can be in Manhattan. You could say you can't be in Manhattan unless you're in New York State.
Exactly. Yeah.
But which one was the statement and which one was the contrapositive?
Or each person in Manhattan is in New York City.
Yeah. Every person in Manhattan is in New York City is another way of saying that exact same statement.
Yeah.
So like people get so caught up in like, well, was that the rule or was that the contrapositive? And it's like, yes. I mean, because in a lot of ways, it is the same statement, just as you say, Ben, restated in different words.
Hey, let's frame it this way. I mean, I like what you're saying and I agree. Fundamentally, and this comes back to something I think that we stress so much on the test in reading comprehension and really just everywhere throughout the test. And that is that fundamentally, you have an if-then statement. What is that if-then statement doing? It's representing a core underlying idea.
Yep.
And that's what's not changing. That idea isn't changing.
Right.
And you can say it as the original if-then statement, you can say it as the contrapositive, but you can also say it 5, 6, 7 other ways.
Yep.
And they all just reflect the same underlying idea.
Right.
So if you can understand the underlying idea intuitively, then all the other restatements either make sense or they don't.
Yeah. And we're going to get into the mistaken reversal and mistaken negation thing here in just a second. But yeah, I agree with you, Ben, that the statement and the contrapositive, there's a million different ways that you could say this exact same statement. It doesn't mean anything different to any actual person. All it really boils down to is if I see somebody standing in Manhattan, I know that they're in New York City. It also means at the same time that if I knew someone wasn't in New York City, I would know that they are nowhere to be found in Manhattan.
Mhm.
That's not the rule and the contrapositive of the rule. That's just common sense implications of the rule itself.
It's two manifestations of the same underlying idea.
Yes. Now, mistaken reversal and mistaken negation is especially frustrating. And I think it's something that we can simplify a lot
Okay.
because mistaken reversal and mistaken negation are two different ways of saying the exact same stupid flaw.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
it drives me nuts. But if the rule is if you're in Manhattan, then you have to be in New York City, it's an error. It's the LSAT's biggest flaw. Confusing sufficient for necessary if you want to
Mhm.
get technical about it. But it's
Yep.
the flaw that's on every single test to say, well, everyone in Manhattan has to be in New York City. And I know that Bill's in New York City. Therefore, Bill has to be in Manhattan. I guess technically, as presented, that's a mistaken reversal
Yeah, because you're
because the rule
staying
was
positive. Mhm.
if you're in Manhattan, you have to be in New York. I then dumbly assumed that if you're in New York, you have to be in Manhattan. I switched it. That's a mistaken reversal.
Yeah.
But I could have made the exact same flaw if I would have said, everybody in Manhattan has to be in New York. So Billy is not in Manhattan. Therefore, Billy can't be in New York.
Yeah.
That would be a mistaken negation. But in both cases, the flaw could just be Billy is in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
If you're in Manhattan, you have to be in New York. Billy's in Brooklyn, New York. Therefore, Billy's in Manhattan. That's a mistaken reversal.
Yeah.
Mistaken negation. If you're in Manhattan, you have to be in New York. Billy is not in Manhattan. He's in Brooklyn. Therefore,
Therefore,
Billy's not in New York.
yeah. Yep.
So Billy in Brooklyn shows that the mistaken reversal and the mistaken negation, it's just two different articulations of the same thing. And those two errors are contrapositives of one another. So
Mhm.
if I had said, if you're not in Manhattan, you can't be in New York, that is the contrapositive of if you're in New York, you have to be in Manhattan, which would
Mhm.
be the LSAT's most common flaw. Anything more you want to say about all this? Because it is kind of funny how often these things pop up, and then also how little you really need all this vocabulary in order to answer the questions correctly.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm just repeating myself, but I would strongly encourage people not to think about any of this, but to really get their minds wrapped around what is the underlying idea that is trying to be expressed here. Because if you can get your mind wrapped around that idea, then however the test decides to express that idea later, you will either recognize it as an accurate representation or something else. And if it's something else, then it's not something that follows from the original claim.
Excellent.
And
Should we
and
give another practical example of all this stuff that we've been talking about besides the geographic one? Do you want to do another if then
sure,
statement?
sure we can. And I do also want to add in a question that I do like to ask myself, and that is when you encounter a conditional statement, always ask yourself what's necessary, because
Okay.
that will guide you to the underlying idea. So, for
Okay.
example, if you encounter a statement that says every car must have seatbelts.
Okay.
Wait, that's not an if then statement, but it
Yeah,
doesn't
but it
matter.
is.
But it is. Because if every
If you're a
car,
car,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
then what the if all cars have seatbelts, or if every car must have a seatbelt, then that means if you're a car, then you do have a seatbelt. So now it is an if then statement. And
Yep.
so what's the underlying idea? Okay, what's needed? Well, cars need seatbelts. So from that, I can extrapolate a whole bunch of things. Like if you don't have a seatbelt, then you must not be a car. If you get into a car, there will be a seatbelt there.
Can't be in a car unless you're in a thing that has a seatbelt. I mean, sure, there's a
Like, yeah,
million ways of saying that same thing. Don't have to worry about what's the statement and what's the contrapositive of the statement. It's all just different ways of saying the exact same thing.
yep,
And then, if you'll allow me,
Yeah.
The mistaken reversal and the mistaken negation is just the same dumb idea, which is trucks can't have seatbelts. Ben said every car has to have a seatbelt.
Yeah.
This is a truck, therefore it doesn't have a seatbelt.
It's like, what? We didn't talk about trucks.
That was the mistaken negation.
Yeah.
The mistaken reversal would sound like, oh, I see a seatbelt, therefore I must be in a car.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're in a 747.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yep.
So the mistaken reversal, or sorry, I shouldn't have switched to airplanes. I should have stayed with trucks. I see a seatbelt, therefore I have to be in a car. No, dude, you're in a truck.
Yeah.
Just because cars have to have seatbelts doesn't mean that trucks don't have to have seatbelts.
Yeah.
And the mistaken reversal and the mistaken negation are the same damn thing.
Same mistake.
It's the same mistake. It's
Yeah.
just a different way of expressing that mistake. The only time this is ever going to matter is on a 1 out of 100 maybe parallel reasoning question.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish they wouldn't test this anymore.
Mm.
Although I can see why they do, because it is a test of just obnoxious detail orientation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my problem with it is that it's expressing the same underlying idea.
Yeah, yeah. It's the same mistake, and they're acting as if the mistakes are different. And what you're specifically talking about is an answer choice that has a mistaken reversal and an answer choice that has a mistaken negation.
Right.
And the original argument was a mistaken reversal. So you have to pick the answer that does that. Yeah.
I can explain to it's the same dumb person, right? Or it's two different dumb people. But I have the same explanation for them, right?
Yeah.
So I got one person who's like
sufficient for necessary.
One person's in a truck going, this can't have seatbelts in it, and the other person is putting on a seatbelt and thinks that they can only be in a car.
Yeah.
And my response is, hey, cars have to have seatbelts. That doesn't mean other things can't have seatbelts.
Yep.
So this is like super common sense instruction, right? I don't really need a whiteboard. I don't need to do a bunch of visual aids. I don't need to do a bunch of diagramming and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, you can just understand the rule in the first place and who it actually applies to, right? So Ben, you're like, the seatbelts are necessary. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Necessary for who? Well, necessary for cars. The rule said cars have to have seatbelts.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean anything else can't have a seatbelt. It just means that if you're a car, you have to have a seatbelt. Perfect. Hopefully that's a bit of helpful advice about conditional statements.
Email daily at lsatdemon.com if you'd like to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening.